It was waiting on the kitchen table when I got back from a late client call. A white binder, neatly tabbed, title page in bold. Collaborative Marriage Plan. She was standing next to it with a glass of wine, wearing that faint smile she uses when she's already decided how something's going to go. Thought we could try something new, she said, gesturing to the binder like it was a centerpiece. Just some relationship improvements. I sat down slowly, coat still on, laptop bag sliding to the floor. The binder was heavier than it looked. Laminated pages. Color-coded tabs. Each section labeled with things like communication norms and accountability framework. I flipped to the first tab and read silently while she watched me, arms folded like a presenter waiting for applause. No raised voices ever. Not during disagreements, not during emotional turbulence. Even tone only, hers included, allegedly, though the examples focused entirely on me. All financial transactions must be visible, weekly reports to be reviewed together. Except hers, of course, for personal mental health purchases. A category she'd defined herself and listed as exempt. Monthly check-ins, written summaries required. I looked up. You made this? She nodded, sipping her wine. Well, I had some help. A relationship coach. And yeah? I drafted it. Don't worry, it's progressive. A living document. Open to iteration. But not collaboration. That much was clear. I flipped further. There were behavior benchmarks. Phrases I was encouraged to use. Emotional affirmations scheduled by week. Even language prompts for arguments, like I was being given cue cards for future conflicts. Page 12, she said. That's the part about expectations for your tone in discussions. And page 20 has the checklist for your daily relationship contributions. There was no section for hers. Not a single reciprocal rule, or even a placeholder for mutual goals. Something inside me clicked, not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet shift. Like a clasp unlocking. I closed the binder gently. And this is supposed to help us? She smiled wider. It's going to make us stronger, more efficient, more emotionally attuned. You always say you like structure. I did. Structure. Not surveillance. Not submission dressed up as self-improvement. I nodded. Smiled a little, like I was considering it. I kept my voice level. Yeah, I said. Interesting idea. She relaxed. Walked to the sink, humming softly. I didn't say another word that night. I didn't argue. Didn't protest. But in my head, I was already flipping to a new page. One she didn't write. My version of the manual was going to look very different. The next morning, I poured black coffee over a stomach already tight. The binder sat on the kitchen counter like a relic of some faith I hadn't signed up for. I opened it again, this time without an audience. It wasn't just suggestions, it was doctrine. Ultimatums, disguised as enlightened partnership. Page 4. I was to initiate weekly State of the Union meetings, where I'd self-evaluate against the checklist she'd designed. Items included. Did I validate her feelings promptly? Did I offer to take on additional tasks without being asked? And did I avoid defensive body language during disagreement? Page 7. I was expected to maintain a shared spreadsheet logging all discretionary spending, hers excluded. Financial leadership must come with transparency. She had typed beneath it in bold. Her definition of leadership, apparently, meant being audited without rights. Page 15. A written reflection was required after any disagreement, not about the argument itself, but about how I may have contributed to emotional disconnection. I scanned every page for one thing: mutual accountability. I didn't find it. This wasn't a bridge to connection, it was a cage. One where she held the key and the camera. I found a section marked flexibility and revisions, but it only detailed how she could amend the manual monthly based on how she felt the relationship was progressing. I had no such editorial privilege. By the time I closed it again, the coffee had gone cold in my hand. She walked in as I pushed the binder aside. Her tone was light, too light. Well, it's empowering, right? I gave her a long look. It's certainly comprehensive. She nodded as if I'd confirmed something brilliant. Then she kissed me on the cheek, quick and performative. I'm meeting Mia for a late breakfast. Back by 2. Her voice trailed off down the hall, already halfway into her day, her version of reality. I stayed at the table, listening to the soft clink of her bracelets as she moved, wondering when she'd stopped asking for things and started authoring them. Because this wasn't love. It wasn't growth. It was control wearing the mask of progress, and yet I didn't tear it up, didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I opened my laptop and created a new folder. I labeled it Manual Observations. If she wanted structure, I'd give her structure. If she wanted performance check-ins, I'd keep receipts. And if this manual was her new gospel, then I'd read every word, and then start writing my own. That night, after she fell asleep in her usual half-turn away from me, I stared at the ceiling and tried to remember when it started to change. Not the last few weeks. No, this went further back. Before the binder. Before the spreadsheets and the tone audits. Back to when we still made decisions and whispered conversations under blankets, both of us blurry-eyed and laughing. We used to build things together. Dinners thrown together at midnight. Shared glances in grocery aisles. Texts sent just to say you'd be proud of me today. Now I was being given a checklist to validate her emotions within a 12-hour response window. I remembered the apartment we first shared. Tiny, loud, ours. We argued once about a broken faucet. I cursed, she laughed, and then we fixed it together, water soaking both of us. That night we swore we'd never become one of those couples who lost the us part of marriage to systems and resentments. And here we were. Or at least, here I was, flipping through a printed manual written like I was the problem to be solved. I kept staring at the shadows on the ceiling, wondering how she'd written all that with a straight face. Had she believed she was helping us? That she was helping me? No. This wasn't about help. It was about framing. Repositioning the narrative before a split, one where I'd already been assigned the role of resistant to growth. It didn't feel random. It felt rehearsed. And the way she smiled when I didn't push back, that wasn't relief. That was satisfaction. I remembered something else then, a moment from a month ago. I'd suggested a weekend trip, just the two of us. Her response had been oddly clinical. Maybe, but let's reassess priorities before we commit to emotional expenses. At the time, I'd let it slide. We were busy. People said weird things when work was heavy. But now it clicked. She hadn't meant money. She'd meant me. Time with me was now a negotiable cost. I turned my head and watched her sleep. Peaceful, unburdened. Not the posture of someone tormented by relationship doubts. No, she looked done. Like a decision had already been made. Like she was just waiting for the paperwork to catch up. This wasn't a pivot. It was a transition. And she was halfway out the door. The binder wasn't the beginning of a new phase. It was the end of a performance. And I was just starting to realize the curtain had already dropped. It started small. Her phone, once left on counters and couches like an afterthought, was now always face down, always locked. She had added a passcode to her laptop, something she'd never bothered with before. When I asked why, she shrugged, said, "Just tightening digital boundaries. My coach says privacy is self-respect." That phrase stuck in my head for days. Not because of the words, because of the way she said my coach. Singular. Like someone who wasn't just dabbling in advice, but reporting to a superior. I tested the waters. I thought we agreed no secrets between us. She didn't even flinch. There's a difference between secrecy and autonomy. I'm finally learning that. No conversation. Just conclusions delivered like verdicts. Around the same time, I noticed 2 withdrawals from our joint account, both just under the $1,000 limit that would have triggered a shared notification. One was for a wellness retreat in Napa. The other was labeled consultation services. When I asked, she waved it off. Therapy things. And the retreat's non-refundable. Except I never saw a calendar hold for Napa. No suitcase packed. No weekend away. So either she didn't go, or she didn't want me to know she had. And then there was the new checking account. I only found out because one of our bills bounced. The autopay had been rerouted. I logged in and saw the update. She'd redirected it to her new bank email, one I'd never seen before. That night, she made chicken marsala and poured wine like we were still us. We sat across from each other like nothing had changed. She complimented my shirt, laughed at my story about a coworker, kissed me goodnight like habit. But it was off, all of it. Too smooth, too scheduled. Like watching someone rehearse warmth instead of feel it. She wasn't just creating a new structure for our marriage. She was creating an alibi. A version of events where she could say she tried everything. Where the binder would serve as her receipt, proof that she was proactive, reasonable, emotionally mature. And if I pushed back? If I questioned her moves? She'd already built the defense, that I was rigid, resistant. emotionally unavailable. No one would think to ask what she was hiding behind the curtain of mindfulness and healthy detachment, but I was starting to. And I wasn't going to just watch her rewrite me out of my own life. If she wanted to act like this was a performance evaluation, fine. I was done being the subject. It was time to study the script. I stopped asking questions. No more comments about the withdrawals. No raised brows at her sudden calendar gaps. I smiled when she smiled, nodded when she talked about her emotional clarity work, and played the part of the supportive husband who was learning to evolve. She thought the binder had tamed me. I let her believe it. While she outlined my emotional metrics, I started building my own system, one designed for something far more precise than harmony. The first thing I did was set up a secondary bank account, personal and untraceable. I transferred small sums each week, always just below the reporting threshold. Nothing suspicious. Nothing dramatic. But over time, it gave me space. Independence. Then I shifted to the digital. I changed all my passwords, not loudly, not all at once. One per day, over a week. I moved our shared cloud backups to a separate account and started saving screenshots, calendars, transactions, message previews that flashed before she could swipe them away. I installed new security on my devices. She'd always known my laptop password. That changed. When she asked why, I shrugged. Coach says I should define some personal boundaries too, right? She blinked once, surprised, then smiled. Yes. That's good. She believed me. She wanted to believe her framework was taking hold. What she didn't see was the external hard drive I kept in my car, loaded with every document she'd ever shared with me. Tax records, property titles, shared insurance policies, anything she could twist into a narrative. I stored it, time-stamped and safe, and I kept watching, listening. She started leaving the room for calls. Not just occasionally, always. Even when the call came in mid-conversation, she'd rise, say, "Work," and vanish. I timed the calls, logged the numbers. She had a second phone. A smaller one, with a floral case I hadn't seen before. It only rang once or twice a week, always when she thought I was asleep or gone. She'd underestimated me. Assumed her performance manual would distract me, humble me, reform me into a version of myself that wouldn't ask questions. But I wasn't reacting anymore. I was recording. If she was laying a foundation for something, a discard, a public framing, a story she could take to friends, lawyers, or family, then I needed my own blueprint. One not made of feelings and feedback sessions, but facts, evidence, contingencies. She once said her manual was meant to keep us on the same page. I'd started a different document, one she'd never see coming. Not until I handed it to her. It was almost too easy. She'd forgotten that her old iCloud was still connected to a shared photo stream we set up years ago, back when syncing calendars and images felt like a sign of trust. She never used it anymore, or so she thought. I clicked through it one night while she was out, grabbing tea with Laura, though her car hadn't left the driveway. And there they were, drafts of the binder. Earlier versions, messier, harsher, unfiltered. One titled, Behavioral Accountability Matrix, V1. Another, Reprogramming Resistance. The tone wasn't just rigid, it was hostile. Consequences for boundary violations, emotional compliance expectations, and one phrase that stopped me cold. Minimize reactive phrasing to avoid framing as conflict initiation. Not avoid conflict, avoid the appearance of starting it. She wasn't planning to improve the marriage. She was planning to win an argument in advance. Then I found the messages. They weren't in the photo stream. They were in a PDF backup of her old iPad, one I'd helped her sync once, years ago, and which she clearly hadn't remembered. One conversation was with a woman named Candace, the same coach, it turned out, who helped her write the manual. Their exchange was chilling in its calmness. Candace had written, "Make sure the framework leaves no room for him to claim he wasn't given a chance to grow." Her reply? Already handled. He'll either comply or self-expose. Self-expose. As if I were some threat waiting to be activated. A malfunction she was documenting. Then came the name. A man named Jared. I didn't recognize it. He wasn't in our circle. Not in our shared contacts. Not in any past conversations. But he showed up 3 times across the logs. Once under a calendar invite tagged, Realignment Dinner. Once in a text to Candace. He says he's willing to support the exit, financial piece too. Says I've earned a clean break. and then one that landed like a fist. I'm framing the binder as growth. He's smart, but he wants to believe we're fixable. That's what gives me time. That was the moment the air left the room. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't overanalyzing. She was using my loyalty, my hope, as cover to build her out. And she wasn't doing it alone. I sat there staring at the screen, the house so quiet it made my ears ring. Upstairs, the lights were off. I heard her moving, a drawer, a closet door, nothing suspicious on its own. But now I knew. The binder wasn't a cry for help. It was a strategy document. And I was the subject of her planned discard. Not just emotionally, financially, socially, legally. She'd written her version of our ending, drafted it like policy. What she hadn't accounted for, what she still didn't know, was that I'd already started writing mine. By the end of that week, I no longer looked at her as my wife. I looked at her as an operator, a careful, composed tactician who smiled through dinner while lining the exit path behind my back. The binder wasn't an artifact of dysfunction, it was a smokescreen. And Jared? He wasn't just emotional comfort, he was a financial advisor. His name popped up again when I quietly ran a scan through our joint financial records using a tool my firm developed for internal audits. A business entity with his signature had requested access to one of our mutual investment portfolios, under the guise of estate strategy updates. He'd been helping her reroute assets. Slowly, legally, almost invisibly. I stared at the line item for 5 solid minutes, hand frozen on the mouse. She was staging my compliance, building a trail that showed she'd tried everything, while draining the ground from under my feet. Even the binder made sense now. It wasn't just leverage. It was documentation. If I pushed back or raised objections, she'd have a stack of reform initiatives to point to. If I got angry even once, she'd frame it as further proof that I was resistant, aggressive, unfit for partnership. And if I stayed quiet, she'd win even faster. So I adjusted. I stopped logging into our joint accounts from our home network, started using a VPN and a secure laptop I kept locked in my office. I closed out any subscription or service in my name alone that she might later weaponize. Then I visited a lawyer, not to file, just to confirm what I already knew. She was setting up a discard, not a divorce, a discreditation. She'd push me out and tell everyone I'd made it impossible for her to thrive, that she tried so hard, that I couldn't grow with her. And Jared, he was her quiet landing pad, financially clean, publicly invisible. But while she was polishing her version of the story, I was building the real one. I started assembling the timeline, pulling metadata, linking calendar events with transaction logs, building a clear map from the first withdrawal to the binder drop to her most recent out-of-town coaching weekend, which, according to her GPS logs, ended at an address tied to Jared's corporate rental. She thought I was still studying the rules she handed me. I wasn't. I was tracing the real architecture behind them, and preparing my own closing chapter, the kind she wouldn't get to revise. 2 days later, I pulled the binder from the shelf and dropped it in my briefcase. She noticed. Taking it to work? I smiled faintly. Thought I'd review during lunch. Make sure I'm evolving correctly. She chuckled, light, pleased, confident. Good man. By that point, I had already reversed the edits. Not the ones in the binder, the real ones, the legal ones. The first step had been the quiet extraction. I'd moved all funds I was solely entitled to into a protected account under a newly formed LLC. The entity was clean, legitimate, traceable only through corporate records that would take effort to unearth, and it operated on autopilot. The second step was the separation of responsibilities. I disentangled myself from any liability tied to her personal ventures, refiled tax documents to reflect single income structure, and assigned power of attorney to a longtime associate, one she'd never met, should anything go sideways. The third step was tactical silence. I kept playing my role. I went to work. I brought home flowers once. I made her coffee with almond milk instead of regular, just how she liked it. I even asked her, sincerely, how her emotional strategy group was going. She leaned into it, shared more than she realized, about breakthroughs, about emotional clarity, about how some people aren't meant to grow together forever. I asked gently, "You think we're in that category?" She smiled like she just won a moral bet. "Not yet, but I'm watching." I nodded. Me too. That night I met with my attorney again. I brought a flash drive this time, one containing documented evidence of digital misrepresentation, financial redirection without consent, and enough metadata to draw a straight line from her reforms to her planned discard. He read quietly, expression flat. When he finished, he looked up. "You ready?" "I will be," I said. "I just want one more move." Because she'd been crafting her narrative, building a quiet exit padded by a manual that framed me as inflexible. But the moment I declined to follow her script, just once, I wanted to see what she'd do. I wasn't pulling the trigger yet. I was setting the stage, letting her believe I was still considering her version of who I should be, just long enough for her to expose who she really was. And then, I'd hand her back the binder, signed, not with agreement, but with a line she wouldn't be able to revise. 3 days later, I left the binder on the kitchen table with a yellow sticky note on the front. Reviewed. Decision inside. She found it at noon. I watched from the study as she stood over it, thumb grazing the edge like it might bite her. Her shoulders tensed before she even opened it. She expected resistance, maybe negotiation. What she got was a single page. Just one. At the bottom, I had written in bold, clean font, "Proposal declined. I do not accept edits." She didn't call out. Didn't slam anything. Just stood there, breathing through her nose like she was trying to stay serene. Then, finally, she called up the stairs. "Can we talk?" I didn't answer. Not yet. A minute later, she stormed in, binder under one arm, jaw tight. "This isn't rejection," she said flatly. "It's regression." I looked up from my screen. "No, it's recognition. Of a pattern." Her voice climbed a half step. "So you're just giving up on growth?" "No," I said. "I'm giving up on becoming your project." She laughed, a short, forced sound. "Unbelievable. You still don't see what this was. It was support. Support doesn't come with ultimatums." She blinked, thrown off balance. Then her tone shifted, brittle. "I need space. I need to think." "Take it," I said, voice even. She left less than 5 minutes later, no explanation, no destination offered. Just grabbed her keys and her coat and walked out. What she didn't know, what she still couldn't imagine, was that I'd already activated the GPS tracker I'd installed in her car. I'd installed it quietly during one of her weekend absences, cloaked under the guise of routine maintenance. Discreet. Legal. I waited until she was 15 minutes out before checking the signal. Downtown. Not toward her office, not toward any friend's place. Straight to the address I'd already confirmed through the metadata trail, Jared's apartment. The one listed under his business LLC. She parked. 48 minutes passed. Then she came back home, silent. No confrontation. Just a tight smile and a comment about needing air. I nodded, as if I hadn't watched her every mile in real time. She went to bed early. Said she had a headache. Slipped under the covers without a word. I stayed downstairs, adding timestamps to the file. Screenshots, location data, entry logs, every detail tucked into a single folder I'd labeled the Real Marriage Manual. She thought this was about whether I'd accept her edits. It never was. It was about whether she'd confess the draft she was really writing behind my back. Now, I had the final version. By the time dawn slid through the blinds, I had everything. The GPS log confirmed her location at Jared's address not once, but 5 times in the past 3 weeks, always on days she claimed to be with Laura, or at a wellness seminar. Her car hadn't idled outside. It had been parked hours at a time. I filed it under documented discrepancies. The PI I'd hired had done clean work. No dramatics. Just images, time-stamped, respectful distance, undeniable. Her arriving. Him opening the door. Her staying overnight once. Nothing vulgar. Just proximity. Repetition. I paired it with screenshots from her messages to Candace and to Jared. One phrase stood out, circled in red. "Once he pushes back, I'll show the work I've done. He'll be the one who looks like he refused to evolve." She was building a performance, a narrative, one where I'd be painted as the inflexible, outdated obstacle while she walked away as the liberated, mature figure who tried. But now I had the full cast list, the scenes, the script. Even her digital trail, once thought deleted, had told the truth when pulled from backup logs and sync history. I compiled it all into one clean PDF, labeled it the Real Marriage Manual. 147 pages. Indexed, chronological, calm, factual, no dramatics, no emotional accusations, just time, place, name, action. I printed a single copy, Bound it, plain black cover. No title. Then I placed it where she'd put hers weeks earlier, on the kitchen table. Her seat already pulled out, her mug waiting. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. She came down just before 8, still in her robe, scrolling her phone. She froze when she saw the binder. Her eyes didn't blink. "What's this?" I took a sip of coffee. "Your version had some pages missing." I filled in the blanks. She opened it. She didn't make it past the second tab before she sat down. And I waited, not with anger, not with pleading, just patience. She tried to edit me into submission. But now, the full story was on the table. No metaphors, no emotional audits. Just reality, in black and white. She didn't speak for almost 2 minutes. Her hand hovered over the page, eyes flicking across the screenshots, the timestamps, the GPS logs. The silence wasn't confusion, it was calculation. I saw it in the way she kept her expression frozen, like a mask she hadn't chosen but couldn't remove fast enough. Then she looked up, and the mask cracked. "This feels like tracking," she said low. "You followed my moves?" "No," I said, voice calm. "I paid attention. After you handed me a document that stripped me of dignity and called it growth." She reached for righteous indignation. "You crossed into my privacy." I cut her off, not with volume, but with clarity. "You didn't want privacy. You wanted immunity. From scrutiny. From accountability." Her shoulders stiffened. "It wasn't like that. You said you were growing. But you were leaving. Quietly. Strategically. With a cover story that made me the villain before I even knew there was a trial." She closed the binder, hands trembling now. "I didn't plan for it to go this way." "No," I said. "You planned for me to nod along. To fail your tests. To become the character you needed so you could leave clean." She leaned back, breathing shallow. "It wasn't physical." I didn't answer that. I didn't need to. The silence said what I wouldn't dignify. She reached for the emotional fallback, the wounded tone. I felt erased. "You rewrote me," I said. "Page by page. And when I didn't fit the version you wanted, you tried to publish a new draft without asking if I'd even stay in the story." She stood up fast, voice tight. "So what now? You want a showdown?" "No," I said. "I want clarity. You said you wanted evolution. Here's mine. I don't do rewrites. You wanted a version of me that obeys. I don't come in revisions." She opened her mouth, closed it again. A dozen reactions ran across her face: outrage, fear, guilt, something like grief. But underneath it all was exposure. The story had slipped. The script had burned. She dropped her gaze. "So that's it?" "No," I said, standing too. "That was it. What comes next is just the result of choices made." I left her standing there, binder in front of her, shaking hands, strategy crumbling. And for the first time in months, I felt clear. Not whole, not happy, but real. And ready to turn the page, mine, not hers. The next week was quiet. Too quiet. No screaming. No apologies. Just subtle shifts. She stopped mentioning the manual. Stopped asking for check-in moments. She moved about the house like someone trying not to trip a wire. Careful, muted, contained. But the damage wasn't a misstep. It was structural. I filed. The papers were clean. No aggressive demands. Just a declaration of separation with clear lines, financial independence, asset division based on contribution, no contest of ownership on either side. I gave her nothing to fight, and nothing to twist. She didn't contest. She didn't even ask for mediation. Just signed the dotted line with the kind of numbness that happens when your exit script has already failed. And then she tried her next play, the narrative. She told a few mutuals that I'd resisted emotional transparency, that I wasn't open to change, that she had tried everything. But people talk. And in her rush to cast herself as the wise reformer, she forgot one thing. She'd left her draft footprints everywhere. Half-shared calendars, emails synced on a backup device. Passive-aggressive prompts she texted me weeks earlier were now screenshots forwarded back to her by people she hadn't expected to choose sides. She lost control of the narrative not because I fought it, but because she overplayed her hand. And because, when faced with truth, silence speaks louder than denial. Jared? Gone. 2 weeks after the confrontation, his profile vanished from her stories, her comments, even her tagged photos. I didn't ask, didn't need to. That wasn't my chapter anymore. I stayed in the house for now, not out of sentiment, but stability. Repainted my office. packed up every remnant of her framework, donated the binder even, let it sit on a thrift store shelf beside old cookbooks and forgotten memoirs. She reached out once, a short message. I know I mishandled it. I hope someday you'll understand why I felt I had to. I didn't respond. Some edits aren't worth reading. I focused on work, reconnected with a few old friends, not to vent, just to remember who I was before her voice became my mirror. The evenings were quiet, sometimes heavy, but mine. No forced affirmations, no staged conversations, just honesty, even when it hurt. And as the weeks passed, I started to feel something I hadn't in a long time. Not relief, not closure, just clarity. She had written a manual. I wrote a truth, and in the end, one held up. The other? Filed under fiction.